you join me today at the wheel of the car that killed the 911? Well, not quite. Today, I'm driving a Porsche 928 S4. Hello, welcome to Furious Driving, and this is a Porsche 928 S4, the car that killed the 911, except it didn't. Now, before we get going, there is one little elephant in the room. The fact I'm going to say Porsche all through this review and not Porsche, as was commented on quite wildly the last time I reviewed a Porsche car. I'm not German, I never have been German, I've never pronounced it Porsche, I'm not about to start now. It's a Porsche to me, so sorry, but tough. So by the early 1970s and certainly into the mid-1970s, sales of the 911 were slumping pretty badly. So Porsche were looking for a new direction. They'd had the idea in their heads, certainly since about the mid-60s, that they really wanted to bring in some kind of a Grand Tourer, a luxury car that could compete with both the sports car market and the sedan market, but at a very high level. And this perhaps was their opportunity. Now, managing director Ernst Fuhrmann was particularly behind the idea and had been pushing for it for a while, and managed to convince Ferdinand Porsche that they should go ahead and build a production concept prototype, which they did. And it was ready in time for the 1977 Geneva Motor Show when they revealed the 928 in all its glory. Now, the thing was space age beyond compare. It was a real shocker of a car back in 1977. It was released in the 1978 model year, and just look at it compared to the 911, compared to anything else from 1977. It's as much of a shock as the DS had been. So let's have a quick look around at the design and talk more about that. Now, Porsche's biggest market was America, the States, and they were worried at the time that the Americans were going to ban rear-engine cars after the furore of the Corvair and that kind of malarkey with the unsafe at any speed situation. Like convertibles, a lot of European manufacturers have been hedging their bets with T-tops and tin-top sports cars and sort of stopping building convertibles for the same reason. That legislation never came, but along with packaging issues with catalytic converters and the heat they produced, they had been looking very strongly at doing another rear-engine car, but the heat and the packaging were the main issues there. They looked at mid-engine options because they liked the idea of that weight balance thing, but it meant it couldn't be a 2+2, it lost the rear seats. Not that it's a particularly useful rear seat in there anyway. So they were left with the idea of a front-engine, rear-wheel drive car. But the fun didn't stop there. They had been toying with the idea of a V10 engine. VW Audi did have a 5-cylinder engine, and they knew they could put two of those together to make a V10. But it's thought they didn't want any association with the VW brand, so tainting the Porschiness of this. So they went their own way and developed their own V8 engine for it. And not just that, down the back, to get the perfect 50-50 weight distribution, this thing has got a transaxle here in the back, which means the gearbox is kind of in the centre, so there's not much legroom in the back, but you do have a great driving experience. They've been briefed with the idea to build a coupe sports car, a GT, that was as comfortable as a Mercedes or a BMW of the time, but still handled like a sports car. Although it was heavier than the 911 had been before, they used lots of aluminium. The doors, the front wings, the bonnet are all aluminium in this thing, keeping the weight down. So what they did was create a perfect compromise. Front engine, rear wheel drive for great handling, great balance, great looking car, comfortable inside. It should have appealed to everyone, but in fact it managed to alienate everyone instead. So initial sales were, well, let's say slow. So when Peter Schutz replaced Ernst Fuhrmann as managing director, he decided they would keep the 911 running alongside the 928 as a sports car and a GT as two different, well, not exactly competing, but semi-competing designs. So the styling is very distinctive and very different from the 911. It didn't actually change fundamentally in the entire 18-year run, right up to 1995. If you look at a 1978 car, all it's missing really is the spoilers, which make the car look a little bit more beefy and aggressive. The car was styled by a guy called Wolfgang Moebius under the American-born design chief Anatole Lapine. This actually isn't the first time I've featured a car which outlived the car it was meant to replace. Remember the Volvo 200 and 700 scenario? Same thing happened with that. In fact, the Volvo 200 not only outlived its successor, the 700, it lasted well into its successor's successor, the 900. The car was so popular, a bit like the 911, which is still going on strong today. Now, the reason this car worked so successfully as a long-running design is because it didn't pander to current trends, current fashions. It made its own style, which just transcended everything else. It used these new polycarbonate bumpers, which is a new idea in the late 70s, which integrated the front of the car completely. So when that became the norm, maybe 5 to 10 years later, it was already there. Now, it uses pop-up headlights, which are a popular thing back in the 80s, but these ones unusually are actually revealed all the time. Normally there's a metal panel over the top so the car's face vanishes when the lights are down, like an MX-5 for example, but not in this case. They are here all the time, so you can flash someone and don't have to wait for the lights to rise up before that will happen. I read somewhere that these are based on Mura units. I don't know if it's actually the same components or just the style of the Mura. I would imagine they're actually just based on the design of the Mura. Now, there are many distinctive parts to a 928, but look at these doors. Not only are they absolutely vast, just look at the shape. It's a huge trapezoidal monster of a thing. There was a time when these were in the doldrums of their values, when the doors alone were worth more than an entire car. It almost looks like it was being designed to have gullwing doors with the shape of these things. Now, possibly the biggest changes of the 928 came around here in the back. Fortunately, this whole rear end is polycarbonate impact bumper, so it was relatively cheap and easy to make changes. The first ones, when you look at them now, look kind of naked and bare because I haven't got these big spoilers, and the lights, rather than being wrap around on the corners, are actually fairly well inset into the bumper. A bit like an early Sierra's headlights, actually. The first spoilers arrived in 1979 for stability, and they grew over time as the car's power grew as well. Now, unlike the 911, which has fairly meagre boot space, this is actually quite a decent load area. It goes all the way back to the seats, and those seats do fold down as well, so you've got a huge flat area. It's not very deep. I mean, this is like in the 944, at the back of the boot, it's a fairly shallow depth where the clamshell comes down, and obviously you don't want anything sticking up, elbows and things pointing too high, because they will go through the glass. This is the same problem we found with the 944. If you're putting anything in the back of it, you don't want other people to see. For example, if you're going to unload some unwanted cargo somewhere, this will need to be covered over with a tarpaulin or a blanket, and you definitely will need to put the seats down for that. Smaller things like puppies will fit quite happily. And under the carpet we do have an actual spare wheel. It's an inflatey type, so there's a pump in there to blow the thing up, but you do have a proper full width spare wheel, so if you do a puncture somewhere you're not completely stranded. You do have a way of self-rescuing and getting yourself home. Much better than the inflation kits we're stuck with today. Now would you look at that? 32 valve V8. So this is Porsche's M28 all-alloy single overhead cam V8 engine. Now, it started out in 1977-78 as a 4.5 litre 16 valve, developing a mere 237 horsepower. Now that rose up to 4.7 litres and made 296 bhp. Then time went by and that evolved into a 5 litre 32 valve engine, developing 316 horsepower, and the absolute range topper of them all was the 5.4 32 valve, making 345 bhp. Now here in the S4 we have the 5 litre, which as I say makes 316 bhp, but also 430 newton meters of torque, and that means the car is relatively quick. 0 to 16 5.9 seconds, which was astronomically quick in the 80s, and a top speed of 168 miles an hour. Now bearing in mind the car is not that light, it's 1580 kilograms, that's 1.5 tons metrically, means we don't get massively good economy despite the pretty good aerodynamics. 21 miles to the gallon apparently. Now, you do sink low getting into a 928, you're sitting right down on the floor. The headroom's not bad though, because you do sit so low into the chair and your feet are right out in front of you. And much as I do love a 911, this does feel a world apart in what you get for your money. Certainly it's a far more luxurious car. Right, so looking around this cabin, it is quite a dark black environment. Everything is very, very dark indeed, apart from these quite vibrant door splashes of colour here in the door cards, which really do stand out and give you quite a vibrant surprise of colour. Interestingly, both the door handles have got these little glow-in-the-dark luminous spots, so you can always find the door handle in the dark, which is quite a clever and practical idea. And these doors are so long, they go back a really long way, and they're quite heavy as well. But thanks to the air vents that are built into the door card, they are quite wide and bulbous, so actually getting your foot through this little area here into the car is quite tricky. It's lucky they put this cutaway below that, otherwise you would be struggling. And there's a little light in the bottom of there. That is one of 3 interior lights, one on each door and one in the centre of the ceiling. So up in this bank of controls, this whole car does have a bit of a sci-fi-ish, space TV inspired feeling going on, with these air vents running vertically down the door, little controls here for the mirrors, and twin speakers, a mid-range and tweeter over here in each door as well. Big grippy door pull, this glow-in-the-dark handle I mentioned, but hidden back here, if you find this little spot, little button which you barely can see concealed in the door card, push this down and out hinges a surprise storage area. Very useful and very discreet. Now, looking down on the right hand side of the driver's seat, as well as the interestingly big 928 logo, which is actually clear perspex or clear plastic, looking down to the body colour of the car, which is quite a fun way of doing things. We've got a number of controls down here using every inch of real estate. The handbrake is down here to the right of the chair, quite unusually. Unmarked rocker switch, which I'll need to go and inquire what that's for. Headlamp levelling button there, and a release for the boot. Interestingly, there's also a boot release on the passenger side as well, in the same or mirror position. These are big chunky, not sports car-ish at all, controls for these things, which you then find the same or very similar up here on the dashboard. Moving on to the instrument binnacle, we've got some big rubbery control symmetry going on. On the right hand side, on each side of the instruments, we have got a selection of 3 round items. On the right hand side, a turny switch, a big rubbery chunky, it's quite soft and squishy in your hand. It looks like it's going to be hard plastic, but it's not, it's a soft grippy rubber. That's your rear screen heater, a pushy on, pushy off for the hazards, and of course your ignition barrel. And over to the right hand side, we've got our headlights and fog lights. So these do actually feel a different texture again. That's harder plastic, and that's a rubberized plastic. Now we move on to the instruments, and this is so very Porsche. You'll notice that the rev counter is taking equal prominence with the speedo. On a 911 you'll find that the rev counter actually sits front and center, taking more prominence than the speedometer, but here we've got equal billing, and redlining above 6,000. That's quite high revving for a V8. They don't generally go up quite as willingly and fast and high as that, and the speedo, 180 mile an hour speedo, and it doesn't go quite to 180, but it doesn't go far off that at 168. Maybe downhill with a tailwind we might be nudging that. And then rather than having the dial area as just a simple flat piece of black plastic, they've actually angled the 2 outer dials in towards the driver, making it more involving, making it more wrap around. On the left hand side, got water temperature and the fuel gauge, and that doesn't tell you how many litres or gallons you've got, it just tells you half, quarter, full. On the right hand side, got our oil pressure and our battery level. Always good to know how much battery power you have left. Now moving back, if I can get far enough back, we have a fairly simple leather steering wheel. It's very smooth but quite a hard finish on this black leather, and in the centre we do have the horn push. Horn test. That's far higher pitched than I was expecting for colours. I was expecting a lot more bass than that. A bit more timbre or timbre to be shouting out from the front of this car. Behind that we've got indicators and light flashes on one stalk, and wipers and cruise control on the other 2 stalks on the right hand side. Who'd have thunk it? Cruise control in 1987. Now moving over, it all looks very aircraft / space shuttle / science fiction inspired, with the large black swathes of plastic, the big angle running towards you, these vents that are multi-directional all over the place. That's above fairly basic and simple air conditioning. It does actually have air conditioning, not that surprising on a car of this value, and also intended for the American market quite largely. Original radio's gone. This one's now got a JVC with sat-nav, I think, built into it, which is far more useful. A digital clock, because 80s. And then down into little ashtray and 12-volt socket, so useful power for your sat-nav and things. And then a T-bar automatic transmission. Because 1970s and 80s, T-bar, like in kit and stuff. Now moving back, we have these really very cool, exciting, I'd even go as far as to say, window switches. They are very chunky. They're designed for either people with massive fingers or big gloves on. Normally you look at something like a Land Rover or a big 4x4 and say, yes, this is because you wear this in the wintertime when you're driving with gloves on, but there's really no excuse for buttons this massive, unless it's just purely to show off those really cool pictures of the door, those big trapezoid doors. That's on the 2 outer edge ones. Over to the centre left, we've got our sunroof. It's an electric sunroof, which does slide back. It's not a very big opening, and I'll show you this quickly. It's a pretty tiny opening, but gets a little bit of fresh air through. And then the rear wiper. Now I need to go and show you this. I forgot to show you a picture at the time, but this has got a pantograph rear wiper. That's kind of fun, isn't it? Now what you may be noticing here is that it may well be a little cubby hole just here with a soft top for your elbow, but there's no cup holders. And looking up forward here, what have we in the way of a T-shelf? We have nothing in the way of a T-shelf. T-shelf failure, a 0 out of 10. The only flat area, or flattish area, is up here by the windscreen. You're not even going to get an espresso cup up here. The rest is a 45-degree slope, so unless you like your tea, coffee and biscuits going skiing into your passenger's lap, do not attempt to T-shelf with this car. It will be an abject failure. Below the non-T-shelf, we have got a reasonably okay glove box. You could put a couple of small items in that furry bit just there, but that's really all you're going to get away with. Whoops. And beneath that, there is a little small shelfette where you could perhaps, I don't know, put some small snack items at the very best. And one thing I didn't mention, because I can't see it from the driver's seat, is we have the multi-way electric seats. There's like 12 different directions of travel on the driver's seat and 8 on the passenger. That's just insanity. That's just confusing. You beat your destination before you got the seat in the right position. Right, now, firing up the 928. Listen to that purring V8. Ah, that's a lovely sound. Shift it down to drive, get some automatic in this car. You will find there's a park reverse neutral Prundle 3-2 shift indicator on the dashboard, which lights up in green to show which gear you're in. And over on the right hand side of the gear shift itself, you will also find big plastic chunky 1980s-ish font park reverse neutral again indicator, which does glow in the dark. Now I've got a learner driver, I'll let her go by first. And you can feel the car just pulling on the brakes, even though just sitting here with the engine idling, it's just willing itself to go. Blind junction, always good stuff. Thank you. Let's find a good, fun country lane to see what this thing is like on the road. Now looking down the bonnet, you do struggle a bit to see where you're actually positioned on the road because it dips away so completely from you. With the headlights off, let's put the headlights on a second, up come the pop-up lights, and you can see more clearly where the front of the car is. It's quite a long way away. Now surprisingly, for a car of the 80s, a sports car of the 80s, it is fairly firmly sprung. Often sports cars and even very high performance cars of this decade were pretty soft on the road. This one though is actually quite hard. Not uncomfortable though, because it is really a GT. Brakes are strong, its discs all round obviously. Clings onto the corner so easily. Now, unlike the 911, which grips and grips until all of a sudden it doesn't, the 928 is a far more stable, far more easy to control, far more well-mannered and predictable car. Sitting underneath it, you've got multi-link suspension at the front, obviously coils, and you've got coil sprung independent at the rear as well, so the wheels are nicely controlled. Now all of that does make the car a very nice place to be, and these big multi adjustable seats are comfortable for a long journey. In fact, the people who own this car have used it extensively. Taken it, you probably see the stickers up in the windscreen. This car has been all across Europe on various road trips, which is really what a Grand Tourer is built for. But unfortunately, that didn't go down well with the public, because people were used to rear-engine air-cooled Porsches that were fast, nimble, uncomfortable things, uncompromising. And because this compromised and gave you comfort and speed, that really upset the purists. They didn't like it at all. And so for a long time, this was a very much unregarded Porsche, the one no one wanted, and for a long time you could pick these up for really just a few £1,000s, which is a shame because it was always, well, honestly, a better car than the 911. So for a long time, these were really undervalued, but now people have started to realise how good they are. And so a car that was £5,000 to £10,000 now, like an S4 Auto like this, is now £20,000 to £30,000. If you want a manual, you're going to have to double that. Now, let's just give it a quick from standstill blast. And the acceleration from this 5-litre V8 is quite amazing. It's a Mercedes-derived gearbox. Originally it was a 3-speed auto, went up to a 4-speed in 1984 or 83, I think, in America, 84 elsewhere. There was lots of changes through this car's life which were different for different markets. So it's quite unusual. Normally they just change the car across everything, but reading through the history of this car, quite often it was changed for the US one year, changed for the rest of the world the year after. Now, if you're not a fan of the slosh box, there was a 5-speed manual option, although that is astonishingly rare. 80% of all these cars were built with an automatic. So that GTS that Clarkson left over in Argentina was a particularly sad loss. This thing is brisk. I think I would prefer it with a manual, but this is a GT, it's a Tourer, so that's why the Auto was so popular. Now, if you like ridiculous trivia, and I'm sure you do because you're watching this channel, you'll be fascinated to know that this was Porsche's first ever ground-up in-house design. Because everything else I'd ever done before was in some way derived from something else. Yeah, the 356 was originally based on a Beetle. 912 was based on the 356, and so was the 911. The 924 and the 944, they were both a VW Audi project, which they didn't want in the end. And of course, the 914 was another collaboration with Volkswagen Audi, but again, never happened. So this was the first time Porsche actually built a car completely on their own from the ground up. Now, for all its potent fury, 5 litres of V8 thunder, this is actually a really easy car to drive. The power steering is there, but it's not over-intrusive, so the steering is still a little bit heavy, but that's fine. The pedals, it's a floor-hinged accelerator, as it was on the 944, as I recall. That's again quite a stiff pedal, so if you want to make the car go particularly fast, you do actually have to work it, really actually put some beef into shoving the pedal down. The brakes though, let's give them a quick shove, are really effective. This thing just stops so quickly, so rapidly. You wouldn't believe how heavy it is when you hit the pedal that hard. And it's so predictable through a corner. This thing is just, well, it's huge fun. It feels fun and it feels safe. In the back of your mind in a 911, you're always waiting for it to bite you. Not so much with this car. Well, thanks for joining me today at the wheel of this 928. It has been a blast driving this absolutely beautiful spaceship. 70s madness come to life that lived, well, nearly 2 decades in production. Quite astonishing. What a car. If you've enjoyed this, please hit like and subscribe as always, and join me again next time when I'll be driving something completely different.